The Weight of Doubt at 30,000 feet. March 18, 1943. 31,000 feet over Bremen, Germany. The cold slips through every seam of the B-17F as if the aluminum skin were paper thin. Oxygen masks hiss. Engines thunder in a steady, punishing rhythm that vibrates through bone and teeth. Frost creeps along the inside of the plexiglass nose, spidering outward with every passing minute. Below, the North Sea fades into a gray blur. Ahead, flak bursts bloom like dirty black flowers in the sky. Captain Robert L. Hayes grips the yoke, gloved hands stiff, knuckles pale beneath the leather. At 26, he already looks older. His eyes track the formation instinctively, counting silhouettes through the windshield. 12 bombers off the left wing, 11 to the right. Tight. Too tight for comfort, but necessary. Separation means death. Behind him, co-pilot Lieutenant Frank Mercer checks engine readings, his breath fogging the glass of his mask. He does not speak. None of them do unless they have to. Words feel fragile up here. A sudden crack rings through the cockpit. Not flak. Something sharper. Something closer. The aircraft shudders. A metallic thump echoes from the left side, followed by the whine of air screaming through a fresh puncture. Hayes feels it before he understands it. The bomber lurches, nose dipping slightly. Control cables? Mercer asks, his voice tight. Hayes tests the yoke. Resistance. Still there. Still flying. Hayes says, "Stay on it." Behind the cockpit, waist gunners shout as a pair of Messerschmitt Bf 109s slash through the formation. Yellow noses flashing, cannons barking. Tracers stitch the air. One fighter passes, so close Hayes can see the pilot's goggles. Another impact. This one solid. Violent. Hayes flinches as something slams into the area, just behind his seat. A dull, chest-deep thud. For half a second, he expects heat. Pain. Nothing comes. The bomber keeps flying. Unbeknownst to Hayes, a piece of hardened steel plate bolted behind his seat has just stopped a 20mm cannon fragment cold. The fragment flattens, cracks, and drops uselessly to the cockpit floor. That steel plate was never supposed to be there. 2 years earlier, thousands of miles away, engineers argued over that exact slab of armor in a quiet conference room filled with blueprints and slide rules. It was dismissed as unnecessary weight. Dead weight. The kind that reduced range, climb rate, bomb load. Everything that mattered on paper. Back then, no one could point to a single mission where it had saved a crew. Because none had flown yet. In 1941, when the Boeing B-17 was still evolving from prototype to production line, the Army Air Forces faced a problem that could not be solved with equations alone. How much protection was enough? How much was too much? Every pound added meant a pound of bombs removed, or fuel lost, or altitude sacrificed. The Flying Fortress was already massive by contemporary standards, and critics questioned whether it could survive European skies at all. The doctrine was clear. High-altitude daylight precision bombing, tight formations, interlocking fields of fire. Speed and altitude would be the bomber's armor. But reality had a way of rewriting doctrine. Early combat reports from the Pacific and Europe painted a grim picture. Aircraft returned riddled with holes. Crews killed by fragments that entered through unlikely angles. Pilots hit from behind. Co-pilots slumped over controls with no warning. Not from head-on attacks, but from deflected rounds, flak shards, and ricochets that found the most vulnerable human targets inside the aircraft. At Wright Field, Ohio, engineers examined wreckage and combat photographs. They traced bullet paths through aluminum skin, frames, radios, seats. They marked where men had been wounded or killed. Patterns began to emerge. One of those patterns pointed directly at the cockpit. Pilots were dying from behind. The proposed solution was simple in concept and controversial in execution. Add armor plate behind the pilot and co-pilot seats. Steel. Heavy. Unforgiving. The objections came quickly. Too much weight. Reduced climb rate. Lower ceiling. Increased fuel consumption. Some argued that adding armor invited complacency. Others claimed it would never stop a direct hit anyway. A bomber was not a tank. You could not armor it into invulnerability. In early meetings, the armor proposal was pushed aside. Secondary, optional, something to revisit later. But a handful of engineers and medical officers refused to let it die. They brought photographs, autopsy reports, fragments pulled from flight jackets and skulls. They argued not from theory, but from blood. Eventually, grudging approval came. Limited armor, select locations, behind the seats, around critical crew positions. Not everywhere, just enough. When the first B-17FS rolled off the line with that extra steel bolted in place, few crews noticed. Fewer understood its purpose. To them, it was just another piece of equipment buried beneath canvas and wiring. On March 18, 1943, over Bremen, Captain Robert Hayes was about to learn exactly why it mattered. As the bomber shudders again under fire, Hayes forces the aircraft back into formation. Sweat trickles down his spine despite the freezing air. The intercom crackles with shouted reports. Tail gunner wounded. Ball turret still operational. Number 3 engine running rough. And yet, the cockpit remains intact. The steel behind his seat does not care about doctrine. It does not care about weight tables or climb rates. It has one job, to stop metal moving faster than sound. And it just did. Paper calculations and blood evidence. The formation presses on toward Bremen, each mile paid for in noise and fear. Hayes keeps his eyes forward, but his body knows something changed. That impact behind him lingers in his thoughts. Not the sound of damage, but the absence of it. No fire, no blood, no loss of control. Just the aircraft continuing to fly. Hours later, back in England, mechanics crawl over the bomber as crews stumble down from the fuselage, faces gray with exhaustion. In the cockpit, a crew chief points to a dent in the steel plate behind Hayes' seat. The metal is deformed inward, cracked like ice under a boot heel. "That would have gone through you," the chief says quietly. Hayes does not answer. He reaches out and touches the plate. It is cold, solid, real. Only then does the weight of it settle in. That same piece of armor is now being debated again, far from the dispersal field, in offices thick with cigarette smoke and chalk dust. At right field, engineers spread combat reports across long tables. Colonel Malcolm Grow, the Army Air Force's chief flight surgeon, leans over photographs of wounded pilots. He does not speak in abstract terms. He points to rib fractures, spinal injuries, penetration wounds entering from behind at oblique angles. These men weren't hit by luck, Grow says. They were hit by physics. The engineers bristle at the implication. They know physics. They live by it. Every bomber is a balance of lift, drag, thrust, and mass. Add steel, and something else must give. One of them, a civilian engineer named Harold Young, taps a slide rule against the table. Every 100 pounds costs us altitude. Altitude is life. Grow does not argue altitude. He argues survival. He presents a growing stack of data from returning aircraft. Bombers that came home with shredded tails. Bombers with entire sections missing. And crews who lived long enough to land because a fragment struck steel instead of flesh. In the early days of the war, decisions were driven by assumptions. That bombers would be largely unopposed at high altitude. That enemy fighters could be outrun or outgunned. That formations were shields. Those assumptions are now dead. German fighters have adapted. Head-on attacks, deflection shooting, cannons instead of rifle-caliber machine guns. The sky over Europe has become a three-dimensional kill zone. The armor debate resurfaces with new urgency. But resistance remains fierce. Production managers warn of delays. Steel is scarce. Tooling must be modified. Aircraft already in service cannot easily be retrofitted. And there's the fear no one says aloud. If they admit the bomber needs armor, they admit the bomber is vulnerable. Instead, they prefer to believe in tactics. Fly tighter. Escort fighters will come eventually. Improve gunnery. Armor feels like surrender. The argument drags on until another set of reports arrives from the 8th Air Force. Loss rates climbing. Crews killed by fragments that enter through radio compartments, bounce off bulkheads, and strike pilots from behind. The same wound pattern again and again. One engineer quietly recalculates his numbers. He factors in not just aircraft lost, but trained crews. Pilots take years to make. Bombers take weeks. Weight can be measured. Human loss cannot. By mid-1943, the decision shifts. Not publicly, not with fanfare, but on factory floors, armor kits become standard. Steel plates behind pilot and co-pilot seats. Additional protection around the radio operator and waist gunners. Still limited, still selective, but no longer optional. On missions, crews begin to notice something else. Bombers coming home with holes that should have been fatal. Pilots alive despite damage that would have killed them months earlier. In England, Hayes attends a briefing where a medical officer shows slides of armor plates removed from aircraft. Flattened bullets embedded in steel. Jagged flak shards stopped inches from vital organs. This, the officer says, tapping the image, is the difference between a report and a letter home. Hayes understands. He thinks of the moment over Bremen, the sudden jolt, the way he had braced for death and found none. He realizes the armor did not just save his life. It saved the bomber. Without a pilot, altitude and speed mean nothing. On later missions, he notices something else. Crews fly with a different tension. Not less fear. Fear never leaves, but a thin margin of confidence. A belief that not every hit is final. The armor does not make them invincible. Bombers still fall. Fire still claims aircraft whole. But survival is no longer a miracle. It is a possibility. Back in Germany, flak gunners and fighter pilots report bombers that refuse to die. Aircraft that absorb punishment and keep coming. Crews who should be dead but are not. None of them know about the meetings at Wright Field, or the arguments over pounds and inches, or the steel plates hidden behind canvas. They only know that something has changed. And as the bombing campaign grinds on, that small, once rejected change begins to reshape outcomes. Not in grand victories, but in quiet returns. In wheels touching down. In men climbing out alive. The sky learns the truth. June 13th, 1943. 28,500 feet over Kiel, Germany. The bomber stream stretches across the sky like a moving city. Sunlight glints off aluminum skins as the formation noses inland. Below, shipyards and cranes wait, sharp as needles against the gray water. Captain Hayes has flown 8 missions since Bremen. 8 returns that feel less like luck and more like endurance. The aircraft carries scars now. Patched holes. Oil stains that never quite scrub away. And behind his seat, the steel plate remains, unseen but always present. The first flak bursts appear ahead of the lead group. Black puffs, then sharper, brighter flashes as the range closes. The sound follows a heartbeat later. Hollow booms that thud against the bomber's frame. Hayes adjusts throttle, holding position. He watches another B-17 take a near miss, its wingtip flashing white as metal peels away. The bomber drops out of formation, spiraling down. "Stay tight," Hayes says into the intercom. His voice is calm, practiced. He knows the men are listening for it. German fighters arrive moments later. Focke-Wulf 190s this time, fast and brutal. They attack from below and ahead, climbing into the formation, firing cannons upward into bellies and cockpits. One fighter rakes Hayes's bomber head-on. The sound is deafening. The nose compartment erupts with shattered plexiglass. The bombardier screams as fragments slice through his flak vest. Hayes feels another impact behind him, harder than the one over Bremen. The aircraft bucks, but the controls remain. He is still alive. Behind the cockpit, the armor plate bears fresh scars. 2 deep gouges, one nearly punched through. Nearly. After the mission, intelligence officers interview crews in a drafty hut lined with maps. Hayes listens as other pilots describe similar experiences. Hits that should have killed them. Fragments stop cold. Steel doing its silent work. The pattern is undeniable now. Statistics begin to catch up with reality. Loss rates fluctuate. Survival rates inch upward. Bombers that once would have been written off now limp home. The change is subtle enough that it does not make headlines. But among crews, stories spread fast. The radio operator who felt something strike his back and realized it was steel, not bone. the co-pilot whose seat armor caught a round that entered through the windshield at an impossible angle, the ball turret gunner who survived flak that shredded everything except the reinforced ring around his position. In Germany, Luftwaffe intelligence notices something else. More damaged bombers are returning to base. Gun camera footage shows hits without kills. The bombers are not tougher in a dramatic sense. They are tougher where it counts. The Germans respond with heavier guns, larger caliber flak, rockets, anything to overwhelm the defenses. But the armor has shifted the equation. It does not stop everything. Fires still rage. Wings still shear off. But the random deaths, the sudden cockpit kills that once ended aircraft instantly, are fewer. Back at the factories, engineers receive feedback they had once dismissed. Field modifications are formalized. Armor layouts refined. Thickness adjusted. Placement optimized. They learn that protection does not need to be everywhere. It needs to be where men sit, where they think, where they fly. By late summer, bomber crews begin to trust the machine again, not because it is flawless, but because it is honest. It gives them a fighting chance. On August 17th, during the Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission, that chance is tested brutally. Unescorted bombers push deep into Germany. Losses are catastrophic. Entire formations vanish. Yet, even in that slaughter, reports surface of crews surviving damage that once would have killed them outright. Pilots wounded but alive. Aircraft held together long enough to reach neutral territory or limp home. Hayes is not on that mission. He hears about it later, listening in silence as names are read aloud. He thinks again of the steel behind his seat, of how easily it might not have been there, how close the arguments came to erasing it entirely. The sky has learned the truth before the paperwork ever did. Survival is not about perfection. It is about margins. Inches, pounds, decisions made far from the flak. As autumn approaches, escort fighters finally arrive in numbers. P-47s and P-51s begin to reach farther, pushing back the fighters. Losses decline, but the armor remains. It becomes part of the bomber's identity, not a symbol of fear, but of adaptation. When new crews climb aboard for the first time, instructors point out the steel plates without ceremony. This is here for a reason, they say, and no one argues anymore. The cost of inches. December 20th, 1943. 26,000 feet over Ludwigshafen, Germany. Winter clamps down hard on the bomber war. Cold is no longer just an inconvenience. It is an enemy. Hydraulic lines stiffen. Guns freeze. Fingers go numb inside heavy gloves. Frost forms inside oxygen masks, stinging lips and cheeks raw. Captain Hayes has completed 21 missions now. He is close to the magic number. Close enough that every flight feels heavier than the last. The formation is smaller today. Gaps where aircraft should be. Absences that never close. Flak is thicker over the target. Heavier guns firing in coordinated patterns. The bursts are closer together now, overlapping. The Germans have learned where the bombers fly and how to meet them. A shell detonates just off the left side of Hayes's aircraft. The blast hammers the cockpit. Instruments flicker. The bomber drops 500 feet in a heartbeat. Hayes fights the controls. The yoke resists, then answers. Another impact. This one feels different. Closer. Inside. The co-pilot slumps forward, his harness catching him before he can fall. Mercer groans, blood dark against his oxygen mask. Hayes reaches for him with one hand while flying with the other. "Stay with me," Hayes says, voice tight. A fragment has torn through the cockpit from the side, slicing through panels and wiring. It misses Mercer's heart by inches. Inches that exist only because the steel behind his seat has deflected the fragment's path. The bomber limps away from the target, trailing smoke. Fighters circle, probing for weakness, but escorts drive them off. Hours later, back in England, Mercer is carried away on a stretcher. He will live. He will not fly again. In the debriefing room, a surgeon explains the wound. He holds up a twisted piece of flak, edges jagged and blackened. "This should have gone through him," the surgeon says. It didn't. The room is quiet. By now, the armor debate is over everywhere except in accounting offices. The question is no longer whether armor saves lives. is how much can be added without breaking the aircraft. Studies are conducted after every mission. Engineers interview crews, photograph damage, remove plates, and measure deformation. They learn which thicknesses stop fragments and which merely slow them. They learn that stopping power matters more than coverage. The armor becomes smarter. At the same time, the psychological effect on crews becomes evident. Men fly knowing they are not naked in the sky. That knowledge does not erase fear, but it anchors it. Fear becomes manageable. Hayes feels it himself. He still flinches at every impact, still braces for fire. But he also knows that a single fragment from behind is less likely to end everything instantly. That knowledge keeps hands steady, keeps formations tighter, keeps bomb runs straight under fire. Commanders notice it too. Bombing accuracy improves. Abort rates decline slightly. The machine and the men are aligning. But the cost remains high. Loss lists grow long. The armor cannot stop everything. Fires consume aircraft whole. Direct hits obliterate fuselages. Men still vanish in a cloud and smoke. What the armor does is quieter. It shifts outcomes at the edge. It turns deaths into wounds, crashes into landings, letters of condolence into telegrams saying wounded but alive. In early 1944, as preparations for the invasion of Europe accelerate, the bomber offensive reaches its peak. Missions are flown almost daily. Aircraft and crews are pushed to their limits. Hayes flies his final mission in February. Number 25. Over Leipzig. The bomber takes hits on the way in and out. Flak peppers the fuselage. Fighters harass, but do not break the formation. When they land, Hayes shuts down the engines and sits in silence for a long moment. He reaches back and rests his hand against the armor plate behind his seat. He does not thank it. He does not need to. He simply understands. Others will take his place. New pilots. New crews. They will sit in the same seats, with the same steel behind them, unaware of the arguments that once threatened its existence. They will fly because someone accepted the cost of inches. When bombers came home. May 7th, 1944. Dusk settles over an English airfield streaked with oil, mud, and tire tracks. The day's last bombers return in twos and threes, silhouettes limping out of the eastern sky. Some trail smoke. Some land with wheels locked or flaps frozen. Ground crews run as engines cough down and propellers spin to a halt. AB 17 rolls to a stop near the hardstand, its nose shredded, its cockpit glass shattered. When the hatch opens, the pilot climbs out slowly, favoring one leg. He pauses, steadying himself on the fuselage, then drops to the ground. He is alive. Medics move in. Crew chiefs circle the aircraft, counting holes, shaking their heads. One of them peers into the cockpit and whistles softly. The armor plate behind the pilot's seat is cratered, bent inward. Hairline cracks radiate from a flattened chunk of flak embedded in the steel. "That's a good hit," the crew chief mutters. "Real good." Inside briefing rooms across England, similar stories are told. Not with excitement, with exhaustion. Bombers that should not have returned, but did. Crews who walked away when chance and steel aligned. By now, the change is accepted as fact. The armor is no longer controversial. It is expected. It is accounted for in weight tables and performance charts. No one suggests removing it. The arguments from 1941 feel distant, naive, as if spoken by men who had never heard flak tear through aluminum or seen a cockpit sprayed with fragments. The engineers who once doubted now document the results. Charts show improved survival odds. Not dramatic leaps, but steady gains. Enough to matter over hundreds of missions. In Germany, the air defense system strains under constant pressure. Bombers return faster than they can be destroyed. Crews survive to fly again. Experience accumulates. The armor does not win the air war. Fighters, fuel shortages, escorts, tactics, and numbers all play their roles. But the armor changes who lives to fight it. Colonel Grow reviews final reports and closes the folder quietly. The evidence is complete now. The steel did exactly what it was supposed to do. Not stop the war. Stop the bleeding. Years later, after the war ends and bombers sit silent in museums and scrapyards, Visitors walk through the narrow fuselages. They brush past radios, gun mounts, oxygen lines. Few notice the steel plate bolted behind the pilot's seat. It looks unremarkable, just metal. But to the men who flew, it was the difference between never knowing what hit them and feeling the wheels touch ground again. Captain Robert Hayes survives the war. He does not talk much about missions. When asked, he shrugs and says he was lucky. But luck was only part of it. Somewhere in the long chain of decisions, someone chose to add weight instead of shave it, to protect flesh instead of chase numbers, to accept that war is fought by men, not machines alone. When bombers started coming home, it was not because they were invincible. It was because a piece of steel, once called pointless, stood quietly between a crew and the sky.